Hi folks, and welcome once again to Spotlight North Carolina Cooperative Extension. North Carolina Cooperative Extension is housed in all 100 counties and the Cherokee Reservation to provide educational information in the areas of agriculture, 4-H youth development, and family and consumer sciences to everyone in the state of North Carolina. For those of you who don't know me or may recognize my face but don't remember my name is Dr. Howard Wallace, and I'm the County Extension Director here for Columbus County Cooperative Extension. And I also serve as the horticulture agent for Columbus County. In that capacity, I serve both homeowners and commercial vegetable and fruit producers and provide them educational guidance with their crops and with their home lawns and home vegetable gardens. And if you're listening to me as this is first being released, you probably recognize that our temperatures have increased. We're sitting up in the 90s most days now. It's getting very hot and very humid, and of course that means that we are in the midst of summertime. And what fruit is more recognizable with summer than the watermelon? So today we're going to talk a little bit about watermelon production. Going to go into a little bit of the basics of watermelon production because I don't have enough time to cover everything that I'd love to cover. But at the same time, along with production, we're going to talk about some common diseases that affect watermelons here in southeastern North Carolina. And I'm also going to speak briefly about the Fair Bluff Watermelon Festival, which will be coming up the last weekend in July. So with that, I do want to get started and talk a little bit about basic watermelon production. Now, if you're watching this in July as it is being produced and aired, we're a little behind the 8 ball if you actually want to grow watermelons. Watermelons have a 90-day maturity, meaning that once you plant them, in 90 days you'll have a crop ready to be picked. So if you're wanting summertime watermelons in late June, early July, all the way through summer, you're going to have to plant those here in Columbus County sometime around early to mid-April, once the threat of frost has passed. Now, as I say that, I know people are saying, well, we don't really ever know when the threat of frost has passed. And I totally understand that. I usually recommend if folks really and truly want to get a good jump, if they start their seed for their vegetable gardens like watermelons in a greenhouse or even start them in a windowsill in the house, that's a great possibility too, because you can then transplant those into the garden and you get a little bit of jump on your watermelon crop for the upcoming year. But watermelons grow great if you just plant the seed directly into the ground. They're a cucurbit, so like other cucurbits like zucchini, squash, cucumbers, they germinate exceptionally well here. They do like our sandier soils, our sandy loams here, so we have the perfect soil types for most watermelon varieties. When you plant watermelon, I always recommend folks do a soil test before they ever plant the first seed. I don't think it's a good idea just to go willy-nilly spreading things like land plaster or lime, or just throwing fertilizer out and incorporating it into the soil. I think it's better to do a soil test just to make sure you're giving them adequate nitrogen and adequate fertilizer. If we change the pH too radically, then we will see potential decrease in production and in growth. If we add too much fertilizer, too much nitrogen can burn the crop as well. So I always do recommend we go ahead and just do a soil test sometime during the winter before we even consider planting our crop. And when we do get to the point where we have amended the soil properly and we're ready to plant, watermelons are going to need a lot of space because watermelons are a vining cucurbit crop. So you're going to want to put somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 feet between each watermelon plant in the row. So if you're in a home garden, you need to bear that in mind. You can get away with it being a little shorter. When I was a kid, I remember our judgment for distance between watermelons was the length of our hoe or our shovel. We would just drop it in along the row, and where the tip ended, that's where we would plant the next one. So we were a little bit short because you're looking at maybe about 4.5 to 5 foot between there. I would still recommend going 6 to 10 feet to give your vines plenty of room to grow and reduce competition. So I did want to just mention that. They're also going to need water. Water is very important for any of our vegetable crops in our home gardens and in our fields. So you're going to want to make sure that you're giving them at least an inch of water a week. It's a judgment call when I say that. You know, sometimes you can take a look and see that we get rainfalls in the neighborhood of half an inch to an inch if we're having a pretty rainy spring and summer. And you may need to add some additional water along with that. If you are watering manually in your home garden, I do recommend not using overhead sprinkler irrigation. I would rather see folks use trickle tape or soaker hoses rather than spraying over the top, and here's why. This brings us into my topic of some of our common watermelon diseases. Watermelons are very susceptible to several diseases, but three that I definitely want to touch base on. The first one being downy mildew, cucurbit downy mildew. It is a very aggressive type of fungus that first begins to affect the leaves of the watermelon or the leaves of any cucurbit. This can also affect squash, like I said earlier. It can also affect cantaloupes, zucchini, cucumbers. With downy mildew, the first symptom is this sort of mosaic pattern you will see in the leaves. You'll see these small pieces along the veins of the leaf start to turn yellow or orange, and eventually they become necrotic. And when I say they become necrotic, they start to turn brown and the leaf starts to die back. The whole plant begins to wilt as well. Downy mildew is a significant disease because it is spread by water. It is a fungal disease spread by water. So the splashing of water off the leaves of a watermelon vine, for example, onto another watermelon vine that's right next to it can cause the disease to spread. And it can spread across the entire field if you're not careful and you don't do your best to manage it out. Downy mildew is an economic threat to commercial watermelon production as well. So this is why spacing is so important again. It's also why watering with trickle tape or soaker hose and not allowing water to sit on the leaves and to splash from one leaf to the other can really do a lot to prevent downy mildew from spreading. Another disease similar to downy mildew is something called powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is kind of the opposite of downy mildew. Downy mildew likes wet weather. Powdery mildew likes dry, windy weather. Where downy mildew spreads with water, powdery mildew spreads with the air, with wind. Powdery mildew is exactly what it sounds like. If you look at the leaves, you'll see small blotches of this white or grayish powder. If it is aggressive enough, you'll see it just cover the entire plant or the entire leaves with this white to grayish powder. Powdery mildew, again, spread by wind, but really likes things dry and stagnant. So if you have your watermelons next to a tree line, which I hope you're not doing anyway because they do really need full sun, but if they're next to, let's say, a row of sweet corn in the garden and that sweet corn is planted very thick and it's blocking any air movement across your watermelon vines or any other cucurbit vines, the potential is there for powdery mildew to start to grow and get aggressive. So we want to make sure that in our fields we're keeping water on the ground to reduce downy mildew risk, and we're trying to open things up and allow for plenty of airflow and space for powdery mildew not to spread as well. Another thing about powdery mildew that you can do before the vines run, as we like to say, you want to go in and try to weed out as many big weeds that are going to cause windbreaks. A lot of our broadleaf weeds, you definitely want to try to weed and get those out before the vines run, and it's very difficult to get back into that field. That can also help a lot with reducing pressure from powdery mildew as well. You can see both, like I think I said this, but you can see both on the same watermelon vines at the same time. The potential is there for it. We've had a very weird weather pattern for this spring. It was very mild, it was very cool. So the possibility for there to be downy mildew and powdery mildew is definitely out there. I have not seen any yet. Nobody's called and told me any of that yet, but I just want you guys to be aware that that possibility is out there. Another disease that I really briefly want to talk about, and it's unfortunate to talk about this one because as vegetable gardeners and as commercial vegetable producers go, this is very difficult to manage, and it's something called Fusarium wilt. It is another fungal disease, but unlike downy mildew and powdery mildew, this one isn't above ground, this one is below ground. This fungal type grows in the ground, and it can be very aggressive, and it can cause steep decline of the entire vine. And the telltale sign to identify it is to actually cut open the main stem of a watermelon vine, and you'll see some discoloration in that vine. The vine, inside of the vine should be kind of a very palish white to a slight green color. And if you start to cut into it and you see something almost like necrotic yellow or beige on the inside, that's kind of giving it away that you've got a Fusarium wilt problem. Now, quickly, let's talk a little bit about control for downy mildew, powdery mildew, and Fusarium wilt. For downy and powdery mildew, there are products on the market that you can spray, but it's important that you be scouting your crop. So if you have your vegetable garden, you need to be out there looking at it every single day and checking for any signs or symptoms of downy or powdery mildew. You can also just pinch off any leaves that may show any sort of symptom of downy or powdery mildew to try to prevent spread through the rest of the vegetable garden, because again, these diseases can also affect your other cucurbit crops. But you can also do sprays of a common fungal product called Daconil, which is readily available at most big box stores. It can also be purchased online if you go looking for it. It's not curative, it's more preventative. So if you do identify that you've got downy or powdery mildew, a spray of Daconil and following the label with repeated applications can help prevent that spread in the vegetable garden. Unfortunately, with Fusarium wilt, there's not a whole lot we can do. The only thing that can be recommended is to rotate away for upwards of 5 or 6 years with cucurbits. If you've been planting watermelons in the same place year after year after year, the population of Fusarium fungal activity there can increase, and we want to try to minimize that. So rotating out so that fungal population can die back is the only thing that we can really do. So I recommend coming back in with another crop in that same area, giving it a break from cucurbits for a while, and hopefully in about 5 or 6 years you can come back in there and have a pretty good crop from there on out. One last thing really quick I do want to touch on while I've still got just a minute for you is the fact that if you're watching this, I know that you recognize that Columbus County is home to a lot of agricultural festivals, and we're proud of that. And I want you guys to know that coming up the last weekend of July is the Fair Bluff Watermelon Festival. Now, much like the rest of Columbus County, Fair Bluff has been pretty ravaged over the last 8 years with hurricane activity. It's been pretty devastating in that part of the county, especially with the Lumber River butted up right next to it. But they're still trying to put on the Watermelon Festival each and every year. Last year I was there and they had a great turnout, and we're expecting the same thing again this year. So I want to encourage you all to go out and support our county agricultural festivals, especially the upcoming Watermelon Festival. But if you've got any more questions about watermelons, feel free to give me a call. Our number at our office is 910-640-6605. And I want to thank you again for joining us here on Spotlight North Carolina Cooperative Extension. Join us again next time as we provide more educational information for you, the great folks of Columbus County.